We're going to jump ahead a little bit on this Godot multiplayer journey and take a look at one approach to get this game online. We'll start out pretty basic, and then as we work our way through the video, we'll cover some more advanced topics. But I recommend sticking through to the end so that you can see the full potential that Godot has to offer. There are several ways to make your multiplayer game available for others to connect to. But in this video, I'm just going to focus on a couple using a dedicated server. Now I'm using Brackeys project that I turned into a multiplayer game last week to get started with for this video. So if you want to follow along, go grab that. Now let's see how to build a dedicated server. So now that you have the project open, head over to the project tab and select export. Click add and then select the operating system you're working on. So for this case, I'm going to use Windows because that's the computer I'm working on right now. Over under the resources tab, select the dropdown and hit export a dedicated server. Now you'll notice down at the bottom, there's some errors about some missing components. So you need to click this manage export templates. So once you have that open, just leave the default selected and hit download and install. This will download the missing components that you need so that you can actually build for Windows. Now there's likely going to be some other setup that you'll need for the other export types. Like for Android, you'll need an Android SDK and maybe you'll need something for the Mac OS. But for getting started, we're just going to focus on Windows for now. So once that completes, go ahead and close it. Select the project tab again and go to the export menu. And you'll notice that there's no error messages at the bottom. So click export project. I like to create a folder called dist for distribution for all my different exports. And I usually name them for the specific operating system type, like Linux or Linux server or Windows or dedicated Mac server or that sort of thing. Here, I'm just going to call this one Windows server because we're creating a dedicated server for Windows. I don't like to have file spaces in my executable, so I'm just going to remove that. It's a good habit I've developed from working with Linux. Hit save, go ahead and hit OK, and then hit close. So now the dedicated server build is complete. So go over to the folder where you saved it. And if you double click on the executable with the .console, it'll actually open up a terminal window on your Windows machine where the game is actually running. And let's go ahead and just run the editor version of the game, and we'll go ahead and try to connect to it. And right now it should work because the IP is set to localhost, but you'll notice that nothing's happening. We're not getting connection. So what's going on here? Let's close this out and take a look at the code. The problem here is we're not actually calling this become host function. We're just running the server. There's nobody there to click become a host or join a server, right? Because it's a dedicated server. There's no UI or anything to interact with. So we need to add some code so that when the server runs, it can detect, hey, am I running as a dedicated server? If so, let's go ahead and become a host or a server in this case. So if we go back to the game manager script, let's add a ready function. And then we'll add this call to if os.hasFeature dedicated server, and then we'll put in a call to the multiplayer manager become host. And this is something we set up in the last video, so if you're feeling a little lost, go ahead and check that one out first. And since we made a change to the project, we're going to have to rebuild that server build or that dedicated server. So let's open up the export menu again, go ahead and hit export project and just hit OK and save. And it'll just overwrite the existing export without any problems. Close this window. You now have another dedicated server built. Let's run another editor build and then also double click on the dedicated server build. Remember the .console version is the one we want to run so that we can see the output there. Now that you're actually executing the server code, the first time you run it on a Windows machine, it's going to ask you if you want to allow public or private networks to access this app. Now I'm going to rely on you to make the best decision here, but I want to be able to connect to this app from other computers on my local network, and I trust my local network, so I'm going to go ahead and hit allow. So this is the dedicated server running, and you can see it's starting the host. It removed our single player and added a one player to the game. And if we click join as player 2 on our client, you can see our player appears. You'll notice the player joined with the network ID. So we know we have a connection from our local editor client to our dedicated server build running on our local computer. And you can do this for any platform, whether it's Mac or Linux or Windows. You can make dedicated servers for each platform. And if you'll notice, there's not another player. Our server was supposed to add another player, right? So if we check under the debug error tab, you'll notice that there's this problem there about not being able to detect a multiplayer synchronizer. I don't really want to get into that. I know what the fix is. It's because the server isn't ready, but we don't want to add a dummy player to this game. So what we want to do is make sure that our server build or our dedicated server build doesn't add a player to the game. It just starts and sits there and waits for connections. So what we need to do is under this become host function where we make a call to add player to game, we need to wrap it in a check for if we're running in a dedicated server or not. So only do it when we're not running in a dedicated server. So like in host mode or when someone clicks the button to become a host. So now that we made that change, let's go run another export build for our dedicated server for Windows. Let's rerun the dedicated server. And as you can see, it didn't automatically try to add a player. And that's good. That's what we expect. So if you go under the debug console, let's run 2 instances, which I've already got selected. Let's hit play in the editor. So for each client, let's click join as player 2. And now you can see that both clients are connected and I'm jumping around and you can see that it's synchronizing between both clients. And of course, the players are being synchronized by that server build. So let's go ahead and close one of them. You can ignore all these errors. I think that's just a Godot bug for now. You'll see the print statement for both the player joined and player left here, but our dedicated server is still running, meaning it's still functional, it's still usable. So we can actually rerun an editor build or a standalone client build on the same machine and still be able to connect to that. So what is a dedicated server? Well, it's a version of your game that's turned into an executable to run as a standalone server. So you'll typically just take the dedicated server build and put it in some cloud provider or hosting service somewhere so that other clients in some similar region can connect to and play a multiplayer game together. You typically wouldn't see this in a P2P setup. I'll cover that in a later time. Let's take another quick look at the export options. So if we select our build preset and under the resources tab, let's look at these options again. We can say export all resources. This is going to be what you typically would export and give to players who want to play your game. So this is the client. And there are some other variations of that are a little out of scope for this video, but the one we're looking at is this export dedicated server. And you can see when I select that, there's this option here for resources to override export behavior. And you'll notice everything in here has strip visuals selected. And that's generally what you want. You don't want to ship your backend server, your dedicated server, whatever you want to call it, with images and videos and graphics and that sort of thing, because it's not going to use it. You're wasting valuable space. It's going to take longer to upload to the internet and build and that sort of thing. So it's a good idea to leave all the visuals stripped. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Maybe you have a map that's generated off some grayscale drawing or whatever. So you need to make sure that if you do have that, you come in here and you select whatever that option is, and then you can go ahead and say keep or remove. Now, remove is used for some edge cases. I don't think Godot has any placeholders for audio right now. So if there's some things you want to remove, just go ahead and hit remove for like an audio file or something like that. But in general, you can just go ahead and leave the strip visuals option selected so that you can keep your build size smaller. And one more thing I want to add, just because you're on a Windows machine doesn't mean you're going to want to deploy a Windows version of your game. It's best practices to stick with a Linux dedicated server when you're deploying them to some cloud provider. Now, if you want to test locally on your friend's Windows computer, that sort of thing, fine. A Windows dedicated server build will work fine. But when you're deploying it to some cloud provider or hosting service or anything like that, it's best to stick with Linux. All right, I've rambled on enough about this. Let's move on. So now that you've seen how to build and run a local dedicated server and connect to it with a local client, let's look at how to connect to it from another computer on your home network. So I'm going to look up the local IP of my computer under my network settings where I'm running this dedicated server. And then I'll open the editor on my Mac, which I have on the Wi-Fi network. I'm going to paste in the IP and hit run. Select join as player 2. And on the left, which is my PC where the dedicated server is being built, you can see the first player is joined. If we click join as player 2 on the other client, we'll get another notification on the Windows side that that player joined. You can see they're both being synchronized. So my PC is connected with an Ethernet to the same internet that my Mac is connected to over Wi-Fi. So this is a great and easy way to play with your friends on a LAN or your local network. And if we stop those clients, you'll see, of course, that we get those notifications that says the player is left. Let's take this to the next level. And I'm going to use AWS for this. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending AWS. It's just I'm really familiar with them, so I like using it. And also, like the other big boys, Microsoft Azure. They offer a really generous free tier, so you'll have a lot of time to play around and experiment and get used to how it works. Now, I am looking into alternatives that are more focused on game development, and there are some other services out there, but we'll get to that in a later video. And the reason why I want to demo this cloud deployment example is because most hosting providers or cloud providers, whatever you want to call it, they're going to have a very similar setup. You're going to spin up some small Linux server to get started. You're going to connect to it, and then you're going to upload your dedicated server build and then run it. And then you're going to be able to connect to that from basically anywhere. So I wanted to walk you through that one so you can actually see how easy it really is. Oh, and by the way, if you don't have an AWS account and you're really interested in following along, I actually have another video on that. So go check that out here. But before we do that, we actually need to build a Linux dedicated server. Go back to Project Export, hit Add, and select the Linux X11 option. Under Resources, select Export as Dedicated Server, Export Project. Name it something like Dedicated Server Linux, and then hit Export Project. Name it Server just to make things easy. And I'm going to create a new folder to put it in called Linux-Server and go ahead and close it. Now we have a dedicated Linux server. Before we can use it though, we need to create a server under AWS that we can actually run it on. So let's take a look at how to do that. So once you're logged in, go under to the EC2 panel and select Create Instance. Name it something like First Game Server. Leave the default Amazon Linux selected. And scroll down and you'll notice that t2.micro has been selected for you. This is the first Linux instance type that we're going to use, and it's also under their free tier. Now this is a really important part. Under the key pair section, select Create New Key Pair. And in the pop-up, name it something like My PC Key Pair. You're going to leave the default options selected and hit Create Key Pair, and it will automatically download. Now take that .pem file and move it somewhere secure on your computer because we're going to need to access it from your terminal later on. Now let's finish setting up the EC2 instance. And as you scroll down under the security section, you'll see Allow SSH traffic. You want to select My IP here, not anywhere. For security purposes, you do not want anybody else to be SSHing into your server except for you. So one way to lock it down to only you is to make sure you select My IP. And you'll see here you have up to 30 gigabytes of storage on the actual EC2 instance. Go ahead and hit Create Instance. Success! Awesome. Okay, so click on the instance link at the top and let's look at the details. So this is basically the metadata for the EC2 instance. And right now it's still in a pending state. It's not quite ready to connect to. If we take a look at the Amazon documentation, one really easy way to connect to that Linux server is using SSH. Now, this is a command that's built into most computers, so we're going to go ahead and use that here today. So whatever operating system you're on, you can go ahead and open up a terminal. And I'm just going to copy paste the command from the AWS docs here as a guide for what we need. So let's type ssh-i and then /secure, and then the path to wherever you put that .pem file. So we can see that the instance is running now. Let's go ahead and copy the public DNS. And the user will always be ec2-user. And then we hit @ and then paste in the DNS. And this will change every time you restart your instance. Now there are ways to make it consistent, but that's out of scope for this. So it's going to ask you about some fingerprint stuff. Just go ahead and type yes. And then right away, it's not going to work. Your PEM file is unprotected. This is something that everybody runs into the first time they try to connect to a hosted server somewhere. So what we need to do is lock down the permissions of that. And this is just a security mechanism to help ward off malicious attempts to connect to your server. So on a Mac or Linux, you're going to use chmod. And on Windows, let's open a new terminal window. And we're going to use this tool called ICACLS to set the correct permissions. So type icacls.exe and then the path to your PEM file /reset. And then you should make sure that you have successfully processed one files. And then you're going to run the command again with the PEM file and then /grant:r and then type out this command here. Go ahead and hit enter. And again, you should get one successful processed file. And then you're going to run the command again with the path to your PEM file and then /inheritance:r. Now I'm going to paste a link to the actual code in the description. Fortunately, you're only going to have to do this once for every key pair that you create, and you can reuse the same key pair for multiple instances. So don't sweat it. You're not going to have to do this more than once. So go ahead and run the SSH command again, and look at that. We're connected to the Amazon Linux server. Next, let's open a new tab, and we're going to upload our dedicated server build. But here we're going to use a command called scp. So I'm going to paste an example as a guide so I know what to type out. So you use scp-i, path to the PEM-r, and then you're going to enter in the path to the Linux server files that you want to upload. And in this case, we're going to link to the Linux server export folder that we created earlier. So next, you're going to type ec2-user for the username, and then you're going to paste in the DNS. And then don't forget here, we need to actually provide a place to where it's going to be copied to on the Linux server in the cloud. So we're going to do :/:, and that's just going to stick it in the user's home directory of the EC2 user. So let's hit enter, and it's going to copy everything in that folder to the Linux server. Great, and it looked like it worked. You should see 3 files at 100%. And now back over into our SSH tab, let's run ls, which gives us a list of everything in that directory. And you can see the Linux server was correctly copied over from our local machine. So I usually work on a Mac, so I'm not too familiar with the Windows version of setting permissions. So if there's an easier way to do this, please let me know down in the comments. So now what we're going to do is execute the server. So in order to do that, let's do /linuxserver/server.sh. And immediately we'll get a permission denied. Well, that's unfortunate. So what can we do? Well, we need to change the permissions so that they have executable permission. So let's run chmod +x for giving it executable permissions. Then we'll type in linux-server/star, which is going to give everything in that folder executable privileges for our user. And you can see there, if we do a ls-latr, all the files have the executable privilege as shown in this column here. So finally, let's start our dedicated server in the cloud. So let's run that same command again. And look at that, you have a Godot dedicated Linux server running in the cloud. Good job. Now go grab the DNS again from the instance metadata and paste it under source IP back in your Godot project. And if you remember, we use the source IP when connecting as a client when you click on join as player 2. So when a client joins, it uses that IP to know where to connect to. But first we need to do one more thing in our instance. We need to update the security group. So go under the security tab and click on the security group ID. On the right-hand side, click edit inbound rules, select add rule. And because our game uses UDP, let's select custom UDP. And we're going to give it the port range of 8080. And if you remember, that's the server port that our dedicated server will start on. Now, if you select this all zero option, you're opening up the game for anyone in the world to connect to. And maybe if your game's running in production and you know what you're doing, that's great. You can open it up and have anybody connect to it and play your game, right? Maybe you have some matchmaking service that sits in front of it and passes the IP of the server behind the scenes, and it's great. You're not publicly broadcasting. Or maybe you want to play with your friends and they're in different areas around the world and you don't really care. You're just going to turn the server on for a couple hours, have them play, and then you can, turn it off. What I recommend doing when starting out, when you're just testing, set it to your IP. That way, no one else is going to be connected to it. Even though it's very unlikely, it's just a good habit to get into. Hit save changes. So now your dedicated server hosted on the Linux EC2 instance is going to be configured to allow your game client to connect to it while on your home network. Now you have the dedicated server on the left running from a minute ago. And let's go ahead and start 2 new clients in your local editor. Join as player 2. And as you can see here, both players join the game on the dedicated server window. All the players are jumping and moving around as expected, and they're being synchronized. They can move back and forth. They can jump around. We can hit the platform and so on and so forth. Great. You've got your first server hosted in the cloud. You've got a client connected to it from your local computer. That's awesome. You can invite your friends, add another UDP row to that security group for each of their IPs, or just temporarily open it up with that all zeros IP option. Then you can share your client that's set to the server IP, have them join the game, and enjoy the online experience. And just to really hammer this example home, if you go ahead and run 2 new fresh clients from an editor, your dedicated server is still going to be running there. It's still going to be capable of accepting new connections. Now, maybe this isn't the type of gameplay you want. Maybe you want your servers to shut down. That's a little too advanced for this video, but just keep in mind that's one way it can work. And let's say you wanted more players to join your game. Well, you'd have to go over to the game scene where we've configured the multiplayer spawner, and where it says spawn limit, right now it's only set to 2. So only 2 actual clients can connect to this dedicated server at one time. So if you want more than 2, just go ahead and change this spawn limit up to whatever amount of players you'd like to connect to your game. Let's go ahead and close those clients, and you'll see we get the message for left game for both of the network IDs. So one final thing I want to cover is how do you actually run the dedicated server without leaving this window open? Well, if you hit Control-C right now, you'll actually kill the dedicated server running on that EC2 instance. And that's fine, that's what's expected. But if you run a ps-a, pipe it to grep server, because that's the name of our executable, we named it server, you'll notice that nothing shows up. And that's what we thought would happen because we used Control-C to close that running process. Now, if we run the same start command and we put an ampersand at the end of it, that's going to run it in the background. So if we hit enter, you'll see the same output like normal, and you'll think, oh, well, it's still running the same way. No, that's not really what's happening here. Go ahead and hit enter a couple times, and you'll notice that you're kicked back out to the command prompt. And just to prove it's still running, let's open up our editor client again. And you can see in the background that the source IP is still set to that Linux DNS. Go ahead and join each client, and you can see they're both being synced around as you would expect. And it's still going to print the output logs to the console, but if you actually want to test it for real, type out exit and hit enter, and you'll actually sever your connection, so you're no longer SSH to that Linux server. So you're back on your local computer. However, if you notice back in the clients, we can still run the game as normal. It's still synchronizing between both player 1 and player 2 clients. So let's say you had enough fun for the day and you want to go ahead and shut down that dedicated server. Go ahead and connect back to the server with SSH. And now that you're in there, type PS-A and then pipe to grep server. And you can see there's two processes running. One is the command to actually start the server, and the other one is the actual dedicated server itself. So let's use the kill command to stop those processes. So copy paste the process ID, kill, paste it in, hit enter, and then it's done. Run PS again one more time. Okay, there's only one left. Let's go ahead and kill that one too. Great. So your game is entirely shut down on the EC2 Linux server. Go ahead and type exit to get out of it again. And then make sure you stop your EC2 instance. You don't want to run your EC2 instance unnecessarily. Yes, AWS gives you a very generous free tier, I think of 750 hours per month for the first 12 months. So you can really have some fun with it, but why push it? Just get into the habit as soon as you're done testing or playing or whatever, just shut that instance down. And you do that by selecting instance state, stop instance. And as soon as you see the instance state moves to stopping, you know you're good and you can log off for the day. So I'm giving you the Infinity Gauntlet. It is your responsibility to learn and know how to use it. Okay, well, maybe like one or two of the stones. But anyways, this is a really powerful set of skills that you can develop and play around with, but just be very careful and do your research. And if you have any questions or anything about it, please let me know in the comments. Latency issues become pretty clear once you start testing outside of your local network or even your local region, right? In a typical multiplayer environment, not everybody's going to be nearby. Hopefully they're in a somewhat close by geographical location, but that's not always the case. So the way this game is currently set up right now is it's not really optimized for that type of performance. And I had some Discord friends come and help me test out some of the changes I was working through to improve that. And I think one guy was in India and another was in Brazil. And immediately you notice how bad the lag was. So I think as the week went by, we were able to make a couple improvements, and I'm excited to share that code. So if you're interested in seeing some improvements to this project to work for a more typical multiplayer environment, please let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in lending a hand and helping me through this Godot multiplayer journey, let me know, either comment or just drop by the Discord and let me know you want to help me test. I'd be happy to have you on board for that. And I do have some plans to build out some P2P stuff, maybe using Steam. And I have some other providers that may be in the works to get that P2P stuff up and running too, that I'm really excited about. So stay connected. That's going to happen soon. Anyways, if there was something I talked about today that you wanted me to elaborate on, or that I mentioned that you were a little confused about, just leave a comment or drop by the Discord and we'll hash it out. No problem. If you like this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe. It helps keep me going. Thanks for watching.